and Merton's spirituality, I think, led him to Hammarskjold's spirituality, and well, he can talk about that himself. But I thought a good part of this call would be just a chance to ask questions, and if he wants to make some opening comments. I'm most impressed about how Hammarskjold sort of, well, did combine an extraordinary life as a peacemaker with another extraordinary life as someone writing spiritual literature, and spiritual literature that was not the type that withdraws people from the world, but helps define how one acts in the world. Roger, would you like to make some just kind of general comments about how you got into this and about the questions I just asked?
Yes, Robert, I'm really pleased to be here with you and your friends. And you know what I thought to do just to start a conversation with you is to read 2 pages from my almost new book on Hammarskjold. It's, I hope you can see this, it's Politics and Conscience, the art of, Dag Hammarskjold on the art of ethical leadership. And it was published, fortunately, a couple of days before the COVID lockdown started, and so it's received no here it is again. It's received no notice whatever, but it did fulfill a wish I had, which was to put into a handbook form, an easily approached form, the essence of his political thought and practice. Behind his political thought and practice was a religious understanding, a religious quest. And I thought to read you just a page and a half or 2 from the last chapter of Politics and Conscience, which is called The Way of a Statesman. Is that a good idea?
Oh, that's a wonderful idea, and I'm delighted this book exists. I didn't know that. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, well, there's just been no notice because we've all been staying at home like hermits.
Wow.
So the epigraph to this chapter, called The Way of a Statesman, is the shortest poem Hammarskjold ever wrote, and practically my favorite. Lord, thine the day, and I the days.
Yes.
This prayer from the journal for 1958 is the prayer of a very busy man who nonetheless remembers what he perceives as a vast structure linking heaven and earth, which despite its vastness is experienced intimately, in part through the kind of dialogue called prayer. Dag Hammarskjold was a profoundly and searchingly religious person. Religion was not for him a moment in the week, however rewarding, after which the rest of the week is the rest of the week, and it was not a political credential. Religion was a meditation he carried with him, a practical discipline, governed by the words of wisdom and challenge he read in the world's scriptures and in the writings of medieval Christian mystics he had long since recognized as his teachers. We would have to look far for a Western political leader of comparable worldly power and spiritual understanding, as far as Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor in the late 2nd century of our era. Marcus was fated to lead military campaigns for years on end at the disputed northern borders of the empire, but at quiet times he would write a private journal that proved to be one of the most influential books in our literature. And then I speak a little bit about Hammarskjold's markings.
Somebody
Yes,
get mute on their... I'm trying to hit my own mute and it doesn't seem to be working. Well, anyway, sorry to interrupt.
Bob, with your cursor in the bottom left-hand corner, there's a mute button. Just put your cursor over that, and there you got it. It turned red. You had it. Need to go back.
Okay. It's all right now. Thank you.
Good. So I'll go on a little further with this, and I think it lays the groundwork for our discussion. We should not imagine Hammarskjold's spirituality as softness and comfort or as a restraint on decisive action. He did find in the pages of scripture, biblical, and as time went on, also Indian and Chinese scripture and classics, the renewal and refreshment he needed. He found in the writings of Meister Eckhart and other medieval Christian teachers insights that carried him deep inside, and also an ethic that demanded work in the world among people. For Hammarskjold, the example of Jesus and the best of Christian and world thought was the basis for a quest, for work on his own nature, its impurities, its unexplored depth, and for lucidity about human affairs. I suppose that he had his own way of responding to Jesus' challenge in Matthew 10:34. Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. The sword was for himself, and through his willingness to encounter and question himself, peace was for others. We have heard him say something like this, quote, "The best fighter for peace is he who is willing to sacrifice his own peace for that of others," unquote. There was a continuity to be earned again and again, never steadily assured, between inner life and the world of action. And here I'll quote him again, "Blood, grime, sweat, earth, where are these in your world of will? Everywhere, the ground from which the flame ascends straight upward." Well, perhaps that's enough for you to understand something about this truly great individual who's insufficiently appreciated. I hope that you will be among those hereafter who can truly appreciate what his thought, his practice, his spirituality, his overwhelming goodness. There was at the time his journal was published in Sweden in 1963, some of his close friends, actually the wife of his literary executor, wrote a letter to a friend of theirs in America saying how much she wished he would have the opportunity to read Hammarskjold's journal, but it hadn't been translated yet. It would be soon. And as many of you know, it was published as markings. But she wrote at the end of her letter, and I'm trying to look for her exact words here. I did separate them out, yeah. So she says, and I think you know that today is the anniversary, the 59th anniversary of the air crash, the assassination that took Hammarskjold's life in Central Africa. And that occurred at a place called Ndola in what is now Zambia. So Greta is writing to this American friend and says, "I look at your photos from Ndola, and of course we know, even if we will never say so to anybody else, that he was a saint." For some reason, I've never forgotten that. That's how she closed her letter. Okay, now I'll be quiet, and you can be whatever you want.
I am just so delighted you've done this, and a fascinating image to me about how Hammar, by the way, in Sweden, some people told me his name was Hammarskjold.
Could I fix that right now?
Sure,
in Sweden, high-born Swedes say Hammarskjold, Hammarskjold, but ordinary folk say Hammarskjold.
Okay. I'm with the people.
Yeah.
Anyway, what for me was a wonderful symbol of how he combined the two parts of his life was the fact that he carried around the Book of Common Prayer with him virtually all the time, along with Thomas à Kempis stuff and some other things. But and that was an earlier version, which included a wonderful translation of the psalmody, the so-called Coverdale psalmody. And he had this with him, and I guess it's what energized him or related the two so well. Anybody else?
I think that's so. But he, you know, Robert, he read, oh my gosh, did he read? But he had a fire inside him that wasn't dependent on reading at this point in his life.
Mm-hmm. Are you finished with your comment? Hello?
I am, yes.
Okay. Somebody else,
Yeah.
please?
Well, happily, I went online and the book Politics and Conscience looks like it's available to order. So that sounds like fun. Thank you. How delightful to hear your preview of it and then to know it's there. I've recently read a book called Peacemakers by Bruce Gentleson. I don't know if you're familiar with it. He's from UC Davis. And it lists a number of leaders from the 20th century and includes Dag Hammarskjold and just talks about his transformational statesmanship. That we have leaders, but they don't always transform. And that's one of the special gifts that I think that Mr. Hammarskjold brought to us is transformation.
That's very true. And it's true at two levels. At one level, he transformed his office. When he came into office in April 1953, the role of the Secretary General was still very much in process. And he basically took every advantage he could in order to make of his role, as some people would say then, more general than secretary. He began to play a political role and found the authorization for that right in the UN Charter. So that was one transformation. And let me give you an example. The UN peacekeepers, which we're all familiar with, that dates to his tenure as Secretary General. And it didn't exist before the 1956 Suez crisis. It was a creature of his imagination with Lester Pearson, the Canadian diplomat and prime minister for whom the Toronto airport is named now. So that's one level of transformation. There's another level of transformation, which is he gave to the UN and offered to the world a profoundly moral voice, a voice of integrity and high intelligence. And he was willing to share with the public, with the press, the best of himself. People didn't know that he was a very religious man, but the results of that powerful religious quest were evident in what he brought to his expressions of the meaning of the UN. So that was a second level of transformation. That's how I would respond to that, Mary Claire.
Thank you very much.
I just wanted to say,
I would say one more thing. Yeah, go on.
Please.
Please, go on, sir.
Okay.
No, I'll come back around.
It is quite a blessing to the world that you are pursuing this path. I never heard of you before I visited Bob, Bob being a classmate from 50 plus years ago. And the fact that you started, Roger, working through the insights and the spiritual path of Merton, and then moved in this direction seems so significant to me. Merton was very important to both me and to my wife, who's Sheldon. And many years ago, I first read Merton when I was a freshman in college. And, but I knew nothing, absolutely nothing about Hammarskjold, just that, yeah, he was the head of the UN. And he died in a plane crash. I didn't even realize that it was an assassination until very recently, when they're in the Ashland Film Fest, there was a documentary following up on the circumstances of that assassination. So I feel blessed that I've had this contact, and we've ordered one of your books from the local bookstore, and yay, just keep on going. This is a really important time to bring forward this particular saint, let us call him.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I wanted to publish Politics and Conscience at the time I did, late February, so that it would find its way into American political discourse.
Yes.
And that hasn't happened, though it was what I'd wished. I think probably largely because of the COVID pandemic. But nonetheless, this handbook exists, and it can do a lot of good if people are willing to read it. Those of you who want to be interested in Hammarskjold, the Politics and Conscience is the short version, the short path. And this book, which is the great big biography I published in 2013, just Hammarskjold, A Life, is the long path. And I do recommend the long path because you're all seriously religious people. I know that through your association with Robert. And this Hammarskjold is one of the very, very few, especially few in the West, who united a genuine spirituality, a dynamic spirituality, with a life in the world, and who explored how those two related. He once spoke of the laws of inner life and the world of act and the laws of action, as if both were subject to law, and that obviously there's almost a scientific spirit in the notion of the laws of inner life and of action. It can be studied, it can be understood, it can be lived more fully. That was his conviction.
So one of the things that I read was that he was considered to be the secular pope, but probably from people who didn't know his spirituality. But it was like he was a parallel leader in the world to what the Pope at that time, and I can't remember which Pope it was now, said. But the Pope actually said something along that line, is what I understood.
Yeah, it's not something that he said in so many words. He said something a little like that. but it was the Pope, when he met Hammarskjold, who said those words. And, you know, it was true.
I was talking with quite an old blind intellectual who, when I said, look at the immorality of our present administration, he said, everybody knows that you can only fight it with power because they know the immorality, but they want the power. But there was a mayor, I think, of Istanbul who won over Erdogan by talking about love.
Huh.
I wonder if, you know, we're up against something that hasn't happened in America before. And I'm wondering if this kind of spirituality is what would help, or if it is doomed to be overcome by power.
I'd like to point out, well, a couple things from what you've been saying, Roger. The combination of spirituality and peacemaking does not occur among all peacemakers, but it seems that the spirituality aspect is what sorts out the peacemakers who seem to die early or are taken from us. And that is, and I'm thinking about today that very few wars are actually fought over moral issues. They're mostly fought over territory, racial, ethnic distinctions, economic, and so on. But when a war comes about that actually is fought over a moral issue, I think it really causes us to pay more attention. And I think, for example, the Civil War in the United States was an example of a moral war, and maybe the Palestinian-Israeli situation today. And but the fact that moral wars do seem to wake us up and make us take a stand spiritually.
Kathleen, I haven't heard from you. Dave, still there?
You're muted. You're muted.
Oops.
We're
No,
here.
you're not.
I'm
Actually,
here.
I
She's
can
in
hear
the-
you, Bob.
Okay.
I'm in the
Sorry about
bedroom and
that.
she's,
I don't have anything to add at the moment, but I'm very much appreciative of the conversation as it's going along.
I am too.
I just want to add that we have 8 minutes remaining on our time together, so just to be mindful of that.
Okay, I have two things I want to say. One, I am absolutely delighted about this book, and I'm committing myself to a book review, probably to be published on progressivechristianity.org, but maybe other places, about just the issues in the book as it relates to what's going on in our country right now. I'm committed to that. And I also want to make a comment. I too love that very short thine the day and I the days prayer. And if you look at my assembling of things and markings mass, that's at the very end. It's to remind us that, yes, we're grounded in a faith, we're working for peace and justice, but it's us who have a day here while we're still here to try to do what we can to improve things. And the election is still not, it's still a way off, and maybe there are ways to get people to think about what an extraordinary statesman who was loved for his concern about the developing world over the power, big countries, US and Russia, or USSR especially, but also someone who just was wonderfully committed to combining his sense of personal vocation with his sense of working for peace and justice. And we all can learn from that.
It's very true and actually touching, Robert. Thank you.